Hi, welcome to another episode of Ministry Talks. I'm Heidi Gaiman from HeidiGaiman.com, and today we have our first special guest for Ministry Talks, so this is really exciting. Today we have Andrew Bates from KFUO Studios in St. Louis, Missouri. KFUO is the radio arm, the communications, how would you say it, of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, right? Is that correct, the radio arm?
We are the broadcast ministry of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, the broadcast ministry of the congregations, really, an extension of the congregations of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And we've been doing this for December will be 95 years that God has blessed us with the opportunity to do this.
That's really awesome. Good. I love the way, I knew there was a better word for it, broadcast ministry, because of the advent of podcasts and all of these other media ways online, different ways to get the message out of the gospel of hope and of what we're going to talk about today, wellness. So let's just jump into it. We're going to talk about physical wellness and ministry life today. This is episode number 17 of Ministry Talks. So physical well-being, Andy. I asked Andy to join us because you have some special tools in your arsenal. You have some special certifications in your back pocket. Can you tell us about those?
Sure. I have been working on, in addition to being a director of Christian education, working on being a personal trainer as well. About over the last few years in this position, I get to talk with people from all over our church body, and being at the International Center of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, I get to meet church workers from all over our church body, and I'll also get to work closely or in the same building as Concordia Plans, and so I hear about wellness topics all the time and how we care for our workers, and it really came to my attention how important it is, one, that we take care of our church workers, but two, stewardship of our bodies is really important, and I'm not convinced we're doing a great job of it yet.
Yeah.
So that's why I wanted to become a personal trainer. So I got my certification. I worked on that for a little longer than the typical person. It took me about a year, and got certified as a personal trainer with American College of Exercise last March, and continuing my education, working toward becoming a behavior change specialist as well.
That's exciting. Yeah, I think you hit a nerve, the fact that we don't always do a great job of caring for ourselves. And I think that is one, somewhat universal to the sinful human condition. We'll never do that job perfectly, but in the sanctified life, we're always working on doing it a little bit better, being good stewards of what God has given us. It's definitely a part of the concept of stewardship. And so focusing on the physical aspects, I think having you here is going to be really helpful to give us, first, we're going to go through some theological reflections on physical well-being, which is, what does God have to say about wellness and our bodies? And then we'll talk about the intersection of that physical well-being with ministry life and its uniqueness. Ministry life does bring some of its uniqueness, I guess, to the vocation, and then how that intersects with our physical well-being. And then last, sharing some tools, some really practical tools for healthy well-being and living that sanctified life of getting to better stewardship of our bodies. So, all right, Andy, tell us, what do we confess that we believe about our physical bodies?
Well, we believe God's word, and we see all the way back in Genesis that God created Adam and Eve. He created them. He gave them bodies. He didn't just create these spirits, but he created them as bodies. And we confess that in the creed, especially in the first article, when we look at the explanation of the creed, we confess that we believe that God has made me and all creatures. He has given me my body and soul. And that's good. He gave us body and soul. And sometimes we misread some of or misunderstand, in the epistles, how Paul talks about the flesh and the fallen nature, and yes, our bodies are subject to the fall, and they reflect that in a number of ways. But our spirits are affected by that as well. Thanks be to God, He has redeemed us in Christ, and because of that redemption, we look forward to that the day of perfection. But these bodies are not perfect, but God has given them to us, and he's given us our souls. We're not Gnostics. The body and soul are both gifts from God, and they're both affected by the fall, but they're also both redeemed by God in Christ Jesus. And so the effects of the fall on the body might look different. We don't necessarily always see the effects of the fall on our spirit.
I think that's a really good point. And like you brought up, the fact that we're redeemed people, I think that because the restoration of our bodies is much more evident when Jesus comes back again, you know, that is going to be like blow your mind evident one day in the way that we experience the redemption of our souls now. You know, I think there is like a discrepancy there in the way we experience it. And so then we accidentally apply that to the fullness of the experience. And instead, like you said, God created both body and soul. He redeems both body and soul. And that's why there is a chance for healing at all, you know, and then he restores one day in fullness.
Sure. Looking at, I was talking about the epistles, looking at Galatians chapter 2, verses 19 to 21. For through the law, I died to the law so that I might live to God. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness were through the law, then Christ died for no purpose. The flesh I live in, I live in the flesh by faith in the Son of God. I just thought that was significant as we were talking about the body, that, I still live in the flesh. Yeah, it's affected by the fall, but I live in it by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me, for body and soul.
Right. I love that. And I love that it's both Old Testament bound and New Testament bound. Like it's not unique to the before Jesus and after Jesus. You know, we live in God's fullness, you know, and his timeline, his storyline for our narrative of redemption. Awesome. So Andy, then what gets in the way of us living in that confession to its fullest? You know, we are those now and not yet people. We like live it, we believe it, and we also struggle with it. So tell us, like, what are the barriers, do you think?
Sin.
Okay, barrier one, and that encompasses everything, is definitely sin, right? Yeah. Tell us more.
Yeah. So what gets in the way of that? All kinds of things, our selfishness, our laziness, anything that really is a symptom of our sin, of our brokenness, our emptiness, our selfishness, anything that can get in the way of that. So, as a church worker, all kinds of things. Pride can get in the way of that. I can do it all. I can do everything. As a church worker, I don't need to take time off. I don't need as much sleep as the average person because I can do it. I'm working for the Lord. I'm serving the church. I'm a servant. I can sacrifice those things. So those are some of the attitudes that we have about taking care of the body, physical well-being.
Yeah, I like that word attitude. I think that is probably 90% of our barriers. It is a struggle. And sometimes those can be not just within us, but around us, cultural attitudes and attitudes of our communities and our friendships and stuff. They definitely feed into each other. And so I think we can have some self-compassion and some compassion for others while still holding each other accountable. That is the work of the body of Christ as it is, that we live in this compassionate love for one another, but we also speak truth to one another. And so that's going to look a little painful, I think, at times. And moving into that intersection of ministry life, like you already said, what is ministry, I guess? Like, what capacity of ministry impacts our physical bodies? And is it simple? Is it complicated? Tell us more.
Boy, it's probably complex. I mean, ministry is complex, and it depends on how God has given you to serve in ministry as well, I'm sure. And so that certainly impacts how you view perhaps what is ministry. When we're talking specifically about word and sacrament ministry or about, the office of holy ministry and pastors, there's a great demand placed on them. And likewise in teaching or in Christian education or care ministry, mercy, those types of things as well. There isn't like a a typical 9 to 5. There are lots of demands placed on us all the time. And then if we're blessed with other vocations such as husband or wife and parent, mother, father, those types of things, when we're given those vocations and trying to balance all of those out, sometimes we're so focused on the ministry that God has given us, caring for others, serving others, being a servant, that we neglect ourselves, our bodies, our souls, in so many ways. But back to your question, what is ministry and what demand does that have on us? I think it really depends on to what vocation, what office you're given. As I was talking about earlier, like office of holy ministry and a pastor, he's preparing sermons. He's constantly studying to prepare sermons, and also probably visiting shut-ins and the sick, and three funerals and a wedding in 1 week as well, and trying to prepare for all those. And that's a lot to juggle. So what does he give up, especially if he's also been given the vocations of husband and father as well, trying to figure out what does he give up. And so what are the things that we give up first? Usually, something along the lines of taking care of ourselves.
Yeah. Especially you mentioned like the big three, like eating well, sleeping well, and taking care of our physical bodies through exercise and rest and things like that. I also think time came up in what you said. The constraints of time are very real, no matter the ministry that you've chosen. I know so many people who work in a part-time situation in ministry, and time is not less stressful. Sometimes it's more stressful for them than when they work in like a full-time setting where there's no clocking in and out in ministry. I have yet to see that. I have had one position where I had a timesheet I filled out, and it was still always over hours. And it was always funny to sit down and do it. It was almost like a really good accountability practice for myself to be like, oh, whoa, time to rein it in a little bit more than the other way of like making sure I work enough. Although that can be a real concern too. And I think you mentioned other vocations of parent, husband, wife. I also think like brother and child comes in, especially in trying to care for, whether locally or far, the parent that God has still given you. Those things all wrestle with each other. And then neighbor, which is in ministry, of course. We're always serving our neighbor within our congregations or our agencies or whatever. But just being the next door neighbor is a real reality for most people in ministry. So that time constraint is really hard.
Absolutely. And thanks be to God, he transcends time. So what will eternity be like? Way better than trying to meet the clock.
That's so true. Yeah, it's so true. And God, I think that's one thing that can impact our concept of, I'm going to talk about in a podcast about lack coming up at HeidiGaiman.com, this idea that we need to, fight with time. We don't, it's not a fight. It's not a wrestling match with time. And I do think that those kind of very abstract concepts take a toll on our physical body. And so other things you talked about, like trying to lead a congregation or giving those sermons or teaching those lessons, whether pastor, teacher, and all these other vocations, those leadership aspects can hold a real physical impact on your body that goes beyond, trying to recuperate with just basic rest,
Yeah. All right.
You're like, all right, let's move on. No, that's good.
Anything else anything else that you want to dig into there?
No, I think just the concept that we need our physical bodies for ministry, we often forget. Like God can work outside of us. He can work through whatever he wants, and his word is really the thing doing the work anyway. But at the same time, I think we really forget that we are physical people serving. So if I am not taking care of myself to be able to walk out my door or get out of my bed or walk to the person that needs care, then I'm not really serving the need well in the way that I'm trying to so hard.
Sure, and I think this is something important to ask ourselves, especially in ministry vocations. What role does your physical body play in your ministry vocations? What role does your physical health play in that? Because sometimes I don't know how we get in this mindset, but we think that it's all about maybe cognitive or theological assent, things like that. That it's really about what we believe, and that certainly what we believe is very important. I'm not saying that it isn't, but stewardship of our body is important in order to be a good and faithful servant as well. If we don't take care of this body, that's going to impact how we serve others. So asking yourself, how does your physical body or your physical health play a role in your ministry? If you notice over time that you're not able to to walk a distance that you used to walk, and there aren't other health issues at play, then why is that happening? And it's worth asking that question with your physician, your medical professional. I'm getting winded when I walk across the parking lot from my car to the church office, to the sanctuary, or just from my study to the pulpit, getting winded. That's worth a question with your physician and finding out what's happening, so that you can be a good steward of that. Because if you can't breathe when you get in the pulpit, then it's going to be really hard to preach as well. So you need to be aware of what's happening if those types of things are happening, and be aware that your physical body does play a role in that. Getting up to the pulpit to preach and having the health to do that is important. And that's just one example. In my vocation as a father, being able to get down on the floor and roll around with a 6-year-old is an important part of my vocation as well.
Yeah, and I know that you yourself also have had an experience with cancer, for instance. And if you wouldn't have checked in with your own physical body, or if you wouldn't have then checked in with a physician, that could have gone a very different way. And so I think a lot of times we think there has to be so much change, but I love your idea of introducing just asking the question and asking it with a medical provider. Makes it much less intimidating, whatever that is.
Yeah. And sometimes those changes can be gradual. Maybe they happen over a year or two, so you may not notice, but pause and take an inventory of your physical health and how things have changed perhaps over time. I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. You asked the question in the show notes, I believe. Maybe I put it in there, but what do we need physically to remain healthy for ministry? That was one of the ways that you kind of formulated it for us. And I think that gives us a positive, grace-filled vantage point, because when we start talking about this need to be physically healthy, I think we feel that hammer of the law really quickly, because like you said, so much of it is about our sin, and that's real. So asking ourselves, what do we physically need to remain healthy for ministry, so I can continue doing this awesome and cool work that God has given me? And we can't control it all. There'll be a lot of things that come in, like cancer or like loss and grief and time for that season and things like that. But at the same time, what do we need physically to begin to be able to move forward is a really helpful question.
Sure, asking yourself the question, can you do all the things you need to do for ministry physically? If you can't do all those things that you need to do physically for ministry, if they're impacting how you serve, what would ministry look like if you were able to change that? If you were able to improve your health, your physical well-being? I'm not saying you have all the answers on how to change that physical well-being, but how would your ministry look different if there are ways to improve your physical well-being?
Yeah, and in our resource section, which we'll get to in just a second, we'll have some of those tools to get started, just getting started. One last comment I have on that section is that I wrote down the difference between humble servanthood and doormat ministry. Like, I think we so often think physically in particular, I don't know why it's true for our bodies in particular, but we don't believe in flagellation, like we just don't, and we still apply it in many and various ways by not taking care of ourselves. And I think the words of Paul in 1 Corinthians, since we already were talking about the epistles a little bit, 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23, where Paul says, "For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them." And then from there on, I'll leave it to the listener to go ahead and look that up if they want to. But this idea that we need to be all things to people, we get really confused in our mind. And then instead of taking care of ourselves, we believe that we need to like lay our lives down, when really we lay it down for Christ, and then he guides us for what we need to do for other people, instead of laying ourselves down for other people and not letting Christ guide that. Because when Christ doesn't guide it, I think we end up with this kind of doormat idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And are we being excellent at what we're doing too? I mean, we're given to be excellent in what we're doing. Humility and excellence are both important. If we're just misusing and abusing the gifts that God has entrusted to us, are we really doing it with excellence?
Yeah, that's a good thought. So let's move on to our last part, healthy tools for physical well-being. What do you have for us, Andy? I know you have lots of tools, so prioritize. Which one's at the top of your list?
All right. So for me, this is what has been useful to me. And this is speaking from my own experience, but also as a trainer as well. And find like-minded friends who you trust to encourage and hold you accountable when needed as well.
Mm-hmm.
The last few years for me have involved just finding a handful of other guys who are in similar vocations, similar positions. We work in offices, but we also have wives, we have children, we have families, we have all these responsibilities. We're trying to figure out, how do we make this work for us, and how do we find something that's fun that we know we're going to do. So, two things that are really important for sticking with it to make sustainable change. One, it has to be something that you want to do. And two, some form of accountability. So finding like-minded friends you trust to encourage you and to hold you accountable. Maybe it's a workout buddy, or maybe it's somebody you just check in with twice a week or once a week or whatever. They're checking in with you, you're checking in with them, you're holding each other accountable for those types of things. Now, accountability certainly implies law, but you can also be gracious to one another as well and share words of forgiveness when you fail. That's part of that relationship as well. So maybe care is a better word than accountability. I'm not sure, but having like-minded friends who are going to support you in that, especially if you are making a concerted effort to make a sustainable life change. The other half of it is also recognizing that willpower isn't the answer. And this was really like mind-blowing for me, learning this over the last 2 years, that, we often think, oh, I just need to have more willpower and I can lose 40 pounds, or I can eat better if I have more willpower. If I had more willpower, I'd work out on a regular basis. Well, here's the truth. Willpower, like everything else in this body, is subject to the fall. And it depletes, just like your energy level depletes, or just like your, sad to say, your compassion for others depletes too after you've been exhausted from your willpower depletes as well. So willpower isn't the answer to making sustainable change. You can't rely on it in order to make a difference. And here's an example. So you say, I need to have more willpower. I'm going to have more willpower. I'm going to do better. I'm going to eat better. And I'm going to work out every day after work. Have a crummy day at work. You're exhausted. Maybe it was all good things, but you're just physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted after work. And now your plan was to use your willpower to get you to go to the gym and eat a healthy dinner. But you're exhausted. What do you do when the day is done at work? What do you do?
We take, Andy, fast. We don't do any of it.
You grab a bag of chips, you sit down on the couch, and you binge watch something on Netflix until you fall asleep.
You've been hanging out at my house.
That's kind of the extreme case. But frankly, if we're relying on willpower, what we're saying is we're relying on the human will, and we know the human will is we know the condition of that human will. So in other words, if you're relying on willpower to make sustainable change, it might work for a little bit, but it's probably not going to last very long. It's not really sustainable. So build sustainable change into your lifestyle sensibly. like I mentioned with accountability, finding like-minded friends. If you're inclined to scrap your plans to work out after work or to cook a healthy meal, build it into your schedule where it's gonna work. For me, that's when it's dark out in the morning. That's when the exercise is happening, is early in the morning. It was hard, the first few times to get out of bed and get going, but because my work here demands that, especially early on, demanded that I have to be in the studio really early. When I started adding it up, I was like, if I just get up an extra 30 minutes earlier, I can get in 30 minutes of exercise that's going to help. And lo and behold, it made it much easier for me to do my work too. I was much more focused when I got in that workout first. And so it made a difference. So then it turned into, wow, I really kind of enjoy this because I know how I'm going to feel in an hour. And I'm going to be able to do my job better as well. So it was something I actually look forward to. Same goes for cooking as well. If you know that you're going to be too tired, or if you suspect that you might be too tired after work to cook a healthy meal, I know people that have been successful in doing meal prep on the weekends, making it into something fun that you do together as a family, prepping the meals and then putting them in the freezer or in the fridge, and then you take them out and pop them in the oven or the crock pot or whatever, doing your meal prep on the weekends so that you're preparing healthy foods that are good for the week, rather than resorting to the not so healthy choices that come in packages or come from a window.
Yeah, right. No, exactly. And I like how the importance of people in that plan seemed really big to me. And I would also say the importance of prayer, because I really feel like prayer, which obviously, but it's like the juxtaposition to willpower. That's what I feel like I've come to after like studying scripture enough that I'm like, okay, I study this because of mental health. Like we think, oh, I'm just going to change my mind and I will not have this mental health struggle, And it's the same thing with physical health. I'm so happy to see someone apply it to this issue, So much of the internet is like, do more, be better, you've got this, which is great, except there's times I don't have this and I need to know that there's a place to go with that. And I do believe that God says, I can give you more than you ask or imagine. And while that doesn't look like necessarily prosperity, even in our physical health, because there's things we don't control, that does mean he's faithful. And so that's the place we turn. Prayer and people, I think, makes a huge difference in this stewardship plan.
Absolutely. And I would say that's something that's been useful and really helpful and meaningful in my relationship with my brothers who hold me accountable as well. Every time that we meet for a group run, we pray before we run. We pray together, and that's been encouraging. But not only that prayer beforehand, but then throughout the week as well, when we're checking in with one another from time to time, what can I pray for this week? Especially if we can't get in a run together, checking in with one another and saying, what's going on in anything I can pray for you this week? How can I pray for you this week? And knowing that we have that encouragement with one another, it's really, especially as guys, it's really been useful in not just physically, but in so many other ways too, mentally and emotionally as well. Having those conversations and helped me grow in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. In some of the notes that you had sent me, you mentioned that for people who are Concordia Plan subscribers, there's some special benefits. And I always encourage the listener, the viewer, to check with their insurance company. So often there are a lot of preventative health benefits that we would miss otherwise, because insurance companies know this is big business. They're losing tons of money on our physical health issues that they want you to be healthier. They know it's in their best interest. And so tap into those resources, use them. They go all the way from like educational videos that you can watch to full-on programs that get you free stuff. And so, Andy, do you want to tell us about a couple of the ones that you had written down that you knew were helpful?
Sure. And just in general, some, even if you're not on a Concordia plan, if you're on another plan, a lot of plans will provide some incentives or encouragement for fitness programs. Like some will provide discounts at like big box gyms and places like that, or YMCAs and things like that. They may provide some incentives or support for you to do that, as well as other wellness programs, Weight Watchers, things like that. You may get some discounts on that. In terms of Concordia plan, for me, Vitality has been a really handy tool to help me stay on track. The way that program works, you get you get rewarded for doing healthy things, making healthy choices.
Yeah.
And for me, it's kind of geeky and nerdy because it uses technology and combines it with wellness as well. So I get to use gadgets, like my handy little watch that tracks my workouts. It tracks my steps too, but and I do try to get in step during the day, but I also use it to track my swims and my runs and lifting and things like that, all my workouts. And you get so many points depending on how many calories or how long your workout was, that sort of thing. And then those points add up and you get rewards like, gift cards, things like that. And it's really cute when it's time to do Christmas shopping. Because my wife can't track the gift cards, so she can't see what I'm buying with gift cards.
Yeah,
so I can still keep the gift secret. So it's really handy at Christmas time. But also sometimes it's nice because then I can turn those points around and use them to get more gear, like training, like new running shoes, things like that. So it's really handy. But what works on that is the way that the system is designed is. You can earn so many points in a week. And sometimes I'm like, if I do one more workout, it'll push me over the fence and I actually, can get an additional reward in addition to all the points that I have, a chance for a bigger reward. You get to spin the wheel, that sort of stuff, and get bigger points. And then a new program that has just been made available to Concordia Plan subscribers, I believe just this year, is called Verta. And here at KFUO had the chance to talk with one of the pastors who subscribed to Verta, and it's actually covered entirely by the Concordia Plan, and it's to help you improve your A1C. So if you are diabetic or pre-diabetic, it can help. It's been very successful for helping patients get that under control, as well as cholesterol and energy levels as well. The pastor that shared his success story, it was amazing. He not only got his A1C under control, but improved his cholesterol levels, and now has plenty of energy to do all those things in ministry that he wants to do. He feels energetic and has the energy, and he has grandkids, and now he has the energy to go fishing with the grandkids and play with them and all those things. And bonus, because it changes, or it has a lot to do with how you eat, not just what you eat, but how you eat. Because of that, it changed how they eat in their household. So his wife benefited from it as well, and saw a lot of the same improvements in her health as well. So it was a household thing. And it really was, a win-win. I'm not going to say it works for everyone, but it certainly worked for them. Not everyone is a perfect candidate for it, but it works for many people. I think one of the benefits of that is that there is that built-in accountability, because you get a Verta physician and a coach like that you talk with virtually through kind of like what we're doing right here. Face-to-face online. You get to talk with a coach, and I think it's pretty frequently. I don't know if it's every day, but I know it's pretty regularly. And check in with your physician as well pretty regularly, and you're testing your blood sugar and I think ketones as well throughout that program regularly. And it's worked really well. So kudos to Concordia Plans for bringing about Verta and making that available to members, because it seems to work well for some folks. So.
Oh, definitely. And we can put a link to that show, that interview that you did, in the show notes here too, so people can find it. Let's talk about some of your favorite reads. What are some of the resources, the people, the websites and reads that you have been able to access that maybe we could access to help us consider and contemplate this physical wellness in our own life? Sure.
And by reads, I have to put that in quotes, because as a busy husband and father and a servant here, I don't get a lot of time to actually sit down with a book, open it up, and look at the words in it and make sense of them. So quite often I listen to audiobooks, which serves quite it redeems my commute time, whether I'm listening to podcasts and programs from here at work, or listening to audiobooks. And so some books that have been really helpful: No Sweat by Michelle Seeger. She doesn't necessarily come from a Christian worldview, but strangely enough, she uses language that really makes sense to Lutherans. Because as I was talking about earlier, finding the things that you enjoy, like for me, it's become going running with my friends. going for early morning runs, I look forward to it, and there's accountability there too, because if I don't show up and they're waiting for me, that's kind of embarrassing. But doing things that you look forward to. She uses the language of chore versus gift. And quite often we look at diet and exercise as chores. And if they're chores, when the willpower is weak, what's the thing we do and what's the thing we don't do? We don't do the chores if the willpower is weak. Instead, we do the things that we enjoy, like sitting down and relaxing, maybe, watching lots of TV shows or Netflix or something like that, and eating the foods that taste good to us. But if we view physical movement, notice I said physical movement or physical activity rather than exercise. She really takes a look at redefining what, looking at how we define those terms and challenging you to look at how you define those terms, diet and exercise. And then maybe even using new terms. She uses the term physical activity and food or nutrition, whatever terms you need to use. But if you carry around these negative connotations for diet and exercise, which most of us do, then you're probably not going to really be devoted to making changes, sustainable changes. So she uses that language. It makes sense to Lutherans. She doesn't necessarily come from a Christian background, but I think it'll make sense to you. And I found it really helpful, and it was pretty insightful for me in making some changes.
Yeah, that's really useful. I think about, I had this relationship with running for many years. Like, I didn't actually really like it. Then I met a guy and he liked it, right? And I happened to marry him and I wanted to spend time with him. So we we ran 3 to 4 days a week. We did 5Ks and things like that. And then I got to a place where I was like, I don't like it, and I'm kind of angry about it. Like, I don't like it, And so but it was fast and easy to access for working out. And so I really just needed to change something. And so I just took a season, and I like to be outdoors. That was the part of it that I did like. And so I started just walking. And first in small increments because of the time factor and everything, and then adding into other pieces of my life. And I realized I really like to walk. It's like my favorite thing. And so I think finding the gift piece of what you're doing or what works for your body or all of that is a really useful way to think about it. I really like that. That's helpful.
Well, right. And that's doing exactly what she talks about in the book, is finding the thing that you like, because then you're more likely to do it, even when the willpower is weak. And walking is just as good as running. If you run 5 miles or you walk 5 miles, if you run a mile or you walk a mile, you're still traveling a mile.
Yeah, right.
Or half a mile, whatever it is. If it's 2 blocks, whatever it is, you're still moving. You're still using the muscles in your body, and that movement within your body, which actually brings us to the next resource. There are important things that happen physiologically in your body through movement, whether it's running or walking or crawling or whatever it is. There are important things, and every movement, sounds really strange, but it really does impact every cell in your body. Or at least that's what I've learned from biomechanist Katie Bowman. And she's really fun. I really have learned a lot from her. She has several books out, like Move Your DNA, Don't Just Sit There, and a couple of other books. She also has a podcast that I listen to. And I'd never heard of what a biomechanist was before I started learning more from Katie Bowman. Fascinating, fun little tidbit. Her audiobook, Move Your DNA, really interesting, really helpful. The best part is the outtakes at the end, though. Got to listen to
Okay, noted.
They're really fun. Caveat, she doesn't speak from a Christian worldview. She speaks, frequently she speaks about evolution. But here's the funny thing. As I was listening to her book and I started paying attention more closely, I'm not thoroughly convinced that she really believes in evolution, because she uses the word designed throughout her book numerous times when she's talking about the human body. I'm like, what do you mean designed if you believe that we evolved? Anyway, I still, while I don't agree with that belief of evolution, and I don't think science requires you to believe in evolution either, I still think there's something I can learn from her. And there are a lot of good things in her book, Move Your DNA and Don't Just Sit There, both really helpful. She has a bunch of books about movement that are really important. Speaking of movement, MoveNat is a book and a philosophy developed by Erwan LaCour, and he they've developed a system of training, and it's really quite fascinating. You would think that like moving sounds pretty simple, right? And it is, but do we really learn how to move in our society today? Like, do we really learn how to move our entire bodies? No, we learn how to.
We learn how to work. Like we learn how to like
Yes.
produce something and what
Yes.
is necessary to produce that.
Yeah.
But like as an EMDR therapist and with a lot of the movement that complements that, that is also a strong belief that I have that we do not appreciate, for instance, the natural movement, even, which you're talking about, even like learned movement. But I think about like children who turn themselves upside down to reset their brains and things like that. What if we learned those movements?
And that's really what a lot of it is based on, is looking at what children do and then saying, why did we stop doing that?
It's like
As
intuitive.
we grow.
Yeah, that's cool.
So learning how to push and pull and hang and swing and throw and jump and crawl. I learned how to crawl all over again.
Whoa. Okay, I'm excited.
You know,
I'm going to look that one up.
but if you think about it, we as adults, we probably don't crawl very much unless you have a job that requires it.
Again, back to the job and production idea of it,
If you're an early childhood educator, God bless you, you're probably crawling a lot. You're probably down on the floor, you're squatting and crawling and doing all these movements a lot. So you probably got that covered. But the rest of us, probably don't do that very much. But if you look at other cultures, squatting and crawling and things like that are not uncommon in those cultures. We've furnitured ourselves into a lifestyle that doesn't require us to move in so many ways. And so we're surprised when we get to a certain age and our back hurts or our knees don't move in the way that we need them to still move. So learning how to do that through MoveNat was really helpful. I got to attend a workshop 2 years ago. It was a nice birthday present from my wife, and got to do that. It was really fun.
Cool, yeah.
Learned how to crawl, throw, hang, swing, jump, all those fun things. And if you're really nerdy and want to geek out about all physical movement, or if you're thinking about becoming a trainer, talk to me. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. Functional movement systems, and Gray Cook, who's a physical therapist, and he's the guy, one of the brains behind functional movement systems. It teaches you how to move well and move often. That's their slogan: move well, move often. Learn how to move first and then do it often. As part of my plan to become a personal trainer, I was not required to do an internship, but I opted to do an internship so that I could gain real world skills. And the gym that I get to train at, they subscribe to functional movement systems with a number of other programs and philosophies as well. But what functional movement systems does is a professional will screen your movements and where your imbalances are, and then help build a plan around that so that you can learn to move well, then move often. And the clients that I've gotten to work with are just fantastic, and they're all ages. We have clients from their 20s all the way up into their 70s, 80s probably. And I would have to say that the clients older than me move better than I do. And because they've learned how to move well first, and they can probably throw kettlebells way better than I can, and they can move better than I can. And I'm always so impressed. And they're also always really happy to be there and train, which is outstanding. They're just, they're some of the best movers I've ever seen in terms of how they go about movement. And I hope when I am in my 70s that I'm moving as well as these people are, because I want to be able to enjoy everything about life. I don't want to have to just sit. I want to be able to move and enjoy it. And so I hope that what I'm learning through functional movement systems really does help me move as well as these clients that I get to train do. Functional movement systems, if you go to their website, I believe you can look for trainers and physical therapists and others who subscribe to the system and use it. So
that's awesome. Thanks. And we will put all these links in the show notes, and people will be able to access the different resources that Andy has talked about, and maybe a few extras that he has in mind that we can share with you. Just really being grounded in the fact that God is the one who made this amazing design, as you said, that he created our bodies to do, not only what they need to do, but he created them to be able to have these relationships and to be able to live with a longevity, whatever that is, whatever days he has numbered, to be able to engage fully as you're saying, in our relationships, in our ministries, in our families, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and of course in the body of Christ as members of that, awesome bride of his that he deeply cares about and deeply connects with. And so, Andy, we just thank you for being here today. Thanks for educating us a little more on what's available to us, on that theological grounding of God's work in our physical bodies and his value in it. And we look forward to continuing this conversation in Ministry Talks more. If you have any questions, we'll also put some links for maybe where you can ask a question to Andy and get more information on all the things he talked about today. So, all right, thanks, listener, and we'll see you for the next Ministry Talks episode, which is Ministry Talks 18 on healthy teachers and healthy students, and we'll dig into systems theory for that one. Thanks. We'll see you next time.